It's time to check something of a phenomenon that's been on my radar for a while. See, while many of the games I look at come from Korea, China, Japan, Russia, and the US, one country that doesn't come up all that often when people talk about MMOs is France. But that's not to say that they've had a thriving scene as much as a thriving franchise. Onkama's World of 12, a slickly animated and rather cheeky, humor-focused game series that started with Dofus and spread out to a multimedia franchise, including comics and an anime. And before you otaku pedants get in your freshly vented panties in a twist for daring to call a French animation project an anime, you are aware that the term has roots in a French phrase, right? If that's not enough, a Japanese animation company did work on a few episodes as well, so it's apropos. I'm not playing that stupid French-ame card here. While Dofus was suggested to me a few times, it was its sequel that had garnered the most attention for people wanting me to look at it. And after I saw it pop up on Steam and it lost its free-to-try status, I figured it was time. This is the MMO Grinder, and it's time to look at Wakfu. As previously stated, Wakfu was developed and is now currently under publication by its home company, Onkama. You might have heard or seen that the original North American publication was under Square Enix. This is no longer the case due to undisclosed circumstances, but much to the joy of my admittedly biased ass. It does seem to be a fairly polarizing topic in the community. At least it ditched its former free-to-try model that kept everything outside the starter city behind a subscription paywall. Note that I can't just put Wakfu under a label like I usually do. I can't call it something as simple as a 2D fantasy MMO because Wakfu is so much more. More of a 2D cartoon fantasy humor-focused turn-based positional strategy open PvP community-run economy MMO. Confused? You haven't seen anything yet. It's safe to say that the game looks incredibly unique. It's a running theme throughout the entire franchise, choosing to go for a more hand-drawn, cartoonish style, which may be partly due to the anime produced during the game's development and preceding the game's 2011 launch by 3 years. The shame of this beautiful art style is that it's skin-deep. Zoom in at all from the camera's default position, and the extremely low quality of these assets become painfully clear. It makes us wonder why they let us zoom in at all and don't simply lock the camera, but we'll talk about more of that in gameplay. The animations are also very well done. Unlike our previously reviewable LODs, each race has the same interaction animations, but they're of such high quality and diversity for each task that they're rather charming. For example, when clipping a tree to get plantable saplings, your character will draw an oversized pair of shears and snip away. When crafting, your character will pull out a design schematic that unfolds by their feet while they work, and while mining, your character will pretend to be an archaeologist instead of a miner. We're not sure if they added that to look like a joke, but the gentle tapping animation looks rather silly for the task at hand. Those unfamiliar with this world and franchise would be forgiven for immediately thinking of the game Bastion, as the art design of both games is very similar. Every single step is its own separate tile and makes the transition into combat seamless. Heck, this world itself is rather pretty to look at, and this extends to the character models themselves, which have cartoonishly exaggerated features, like cats with massive heads and tiny bodies, dragon ostriches with massive derpy eyes, and chickens with pronounced feathery breasts that like to sexually assault little male chickens. Wait, what? Okay, I feel like someone might want to contest me on that, but the expressions on their faces and that exhausted rolling around from both participants once it's over make most of us that look at this animation think that's exactly what's going on. And knowing this franchise, I'm pretty sure that's what's being implied here, especially when the big fat male chicken starts assaulting the female one from behind as it desperately tries to get away. Oh, wait, sorry, I mean they're giving each other a foot rub. Yes, the game is rather sexualized in surprising ways. Well, perhaps not so surprising in the more sex-positive country of France, but it is rather amusing to see it here. It's sprinkled all throughout the game, and while the behavior of the chicken-like tofus is the most eye-catching, it likely won't escape your notice for long that the sheep-like gobbles shake around their tails, yet the female versions of the gobbles include their much more pronounced asses that aren't present on the males. The graphics aren't quite as smooth or crisp as they are in the anime, but the show's style is very present in the game, and you won't have too much trouble recognizing the assets from one to the other. The synergy is here. Starting starting to sound like a broken record here with all these past games and saying the same thing over and over again, but prepare your speakers and headphones for yet another game that starts out incredibly loud. Once you've adjusted the volume accordingly, you should be warned immediately, though, that the sound sliders have absolutely no effect on the game's cinematics. So prepare to be blown away by overblown audio anyway, even if you turned everything down. It's a specifically odd issue, and one that doesn't come up often and hasn't been experienced by anyone in Grindstone since Dark Souls 2. One interesting aspect of the soundtrack is that it does share tracks with the anime, further contributing to the overall synergy of the franchise. Music in the game is usually very upbeat and orchestrated, with the track labeled Island Battle being one of the happiest sounding songs I've heard in a long time. It's got a xylophone in it, for God's sake. The sounds are also pretty upbeat. Enemies squeak happily when attacking, or being attacked. Yes, I know what I just said. This sound is also used in the show as well, and while it could come across as sounding stock, it's iconic to every character and enemy. The game really gives an easily recognizable personality to everything, and that carries the tone of this game well. When starting up, the game first suggests you begin the tutorial. The merit of that suggestion is dubious, but we'll get to that shortly. Here you'll be given a unique class that can only be played within the tutorial, so feel free to name it whatever you want, as when the tutorial ends, you'll be able to reincarnate into a new class and choose a new name. Once you begin the tutorial, you'll be guided through movement, basic combat, and the ecosystem, system. This is one of the rather interesting mechanics of the game, as each area has its own unique fauna that must be cultivated by the player base. To do this, you must right-click a mob, tree, plant, or the like, and choose to gather seeds or saplings, which can be replanted in the appropriate area. These areas are designated by a percentage chance for the seed or sapling to take root, so don't be surprised if you initiate a planting and nothing happens. It just means you'd failed and you'd need to try again. The issue with this tutorial is that it's borderline useless to the main game. Sure, it'll show you the very basics of the game, but the special tutorial class is the real problem. You see, the classes in Wakfu are truly unique, with one class playing nothing like any other, which means that they can be hard to get your head around during play. Quick guidelines of each class should have been added to the tutorial, as many of the classes have extremely convoluted playstyles, and the tooltips on the abilities are often confusing and poorly translated, oftentimes explaining how a mechanic works by referencing another mechanic that isn't explained. It's refreshing to see so much effort put into making sure each and every class is truly unique. For example, the Kra Archer is your straightforward long-range damage dealer, though there are beacons, which are never properly explained, that have various effects based on the arrow type that hits them. On the other end of the bell curve is the Zelor, which desperately needed some kind of clarification, as it uses time as a mechanic. All its attacks change based on the ticks and tocks of a clock. There's a dial you can summon to teleport around the different hours of the clock, grant bonuses based on that hour, change attacks if you fire from one hour to another, and revive or give extra attacks to teammates. The SRAM is a straightforward assassin who can teleport behind enemies and get critical hits in and summon in a copy of themselves. On the other end, the Ecaflip is based entirely around a tarot deck, drawing a card each turn that can either have a positive or negative effect and be redrawn once to press your luck, has all of their attacks based on dice rolls, and features a duality of benefits and harm in most of its abilities. Really, there is a lot of variety here, from treasure hunters to drunken pandas, steampunk riflemen, and voodoo plant priestesses. Feel free to try out each class for a bit and get your head around their mechanics. You can easily delete the character and start a new one, and choosing to skip the tutorial won't hinder you in any noticeable fashion. So, how does the game actually play out? Surprisingly well, given that it's a turn-based strategy and MMOs seem so diametrically opposed to that in today's genre. When you first enter combat, a simple boundary will be drawn along the game world's tiles, which will show you the size of the battle area. Other players can choose to watch, but only party members can jump into the fight and assist you unless you hit the Call for Help button. At the start of combat, you'll need to choose your placement from available tiles. The tiles you can choose will be denoted with blue. Hit space to lock in your choice. If you have multiple people in your party, you can hit space again to unlock your choice and change positions if one of your party members requests the square that you're in. After everyone is locked in, the game will assign you an order of battle, dictated by your character's initiative score. When it's your turn, you'll have 30 seconds to use up your character's movement points, denoted with an M in the UI, Wakfu points required by some special attacks, denoted with a W, and ability points which are used to attack or cast spells, denoted with an A. You may notice that in the top left corner a special objective appears that you can choose to complete for bonus points. These points increase the likelihood of good drops and add some experience or give you a small buff. This is where a major issue pops up, and one of several that the combat system has. While the mechanics are well done and the core gameplay is solid, glitches and bad translations hamper the experience. For example, you may have received a bonus objective that requires you to kill enemies in descending order, from highest to lowest level, but when you kill the highest, you fail the objective because the game actually wanted you to kill the lowest level ones to the highest first. If you fail this objective and realize what you did wrong, then you may try to do the opposite for the objective that asks you to kill lowest to highest, but that objective is actually correct. The good news is that these bonus objectives are not mandatory, and you can easily ignore them if they're a bit too ridiculous, like having to keep all your stats at even numbers because your character got a bout of OCD. The second issue, which we mentioned way back in graphics, is the camera and movement system. Some objects within the world, like boxes, crates, walkways, and the like, can make movement a nightmare, because the camera is locked in a fixed position, and some of the objects are large enough to overlap other spaces. Zooming in doesn't really help the issue at all, as even when you're using the transparency setting in the UI, you still cannot see the spaces between these objects and use them. Hell, the transparency only seems to affect objects that you can't move onto, so those climbable crates, walls, and stairs will still be in the way. It's very easy to click on something that looks like it's in front of you but end up climbing on top of a box and losing the bonus objective because of it. This issue could have been solved by allowing the camera to be rotated, even if rotation were locked to 90-degree increments, but that would require upgrading the low-quality assets, so it's not likely. The final issue with combat is that the game likes to eat inputs, a lot. We don't know how common this is amongst the player base, but several members of Grindstone kept having the game simply refuse inputs, or do the exact opposite of what they wanted to do. Sometimes clicking a spell won't actually select the spell and you'll end up running towards your target, or even better, refusing to do anything your entire turn as the game somehow thinks you haven't pressed anything at all. This could be alleviated by allowing the player to take their time, but that also defeats the purpose of having 30-second turns to begin with, ensuring that someone can't by mistake, or malicious intent, simply just sit idle for extended periods instead of ending their turn. Once you have the basics of your class figured out, you'll notice that there are surprisingly few quests in the world. The game instead opts to highlight when dungeons unlock and level ups, or urge you to choose a nation, both of which will be covered in community. It seems Wakfu is going for that true sandbox MMO feel, with a few guiding principles to get you going in the right direction, but ultimately leaving the gameplay up to you. This isn't really handled well as the previously mentioned issues show, but it is an interesting concept nonetheless. For starters, you'll begin your journey on the newbie island of Astrub, which contains the titular walled city and a bit of land surrounding it with 4 docks, leading to the various nations of each point of the compass. This is a safe haven, allowing you to get a feel for your class and letting new players try out some of the starter quests, which are heavily pun-tastic and reference-heavy, but we'll get into that later. A quick note should be made that when highlighting mobs, you may be intimidated by the big level gaps between you and the mobs listed. However, this is simply the encounter level, which adds up all the levels of the mobs within and displays that instead, so don't be surprised if you manage to be a level 100 encounter as a level 30 player. The city of Astrub also houses the various crafting professions and trainers, which sadly follows the usual MMO formula of crafting hundreds of useless items to get to the next tier and gain the ability to craft more useless items. The crafting system is also incredibly convoluted, with the majority requiring special items only harvestable from key resources at set times, or set maturity levels of plants. If you feel like being a weapon, armor, or bag crafter, prepare to be eternally frustrated. There's a rather useful crafting profession that allows you to print the in-game currency of Kama, which we would highly recommend everyone dip into that system, as there's no other way outside of setting up your own player shop or grinding to earn the high amounts of Kama needed in a reasonable amount of time. An even larger issue with the crafting system is that everything in the world is dictated by the player base planting new items like trees or mobs, with the exception of minerals, which automatically come back over time. You can easily fall into a situation where the resources you need don't exist anywhere in the world. This is somewhat alleviated by random encounters with Cap'n Atcha, a cat thief that presents players with a simple tile-matching minigame that rewards 40 of whatever resource the player was gathering when the encounter was triggered. On top of the scarcity problem is another layer of complexity. There's a weather system in the game as well, meaning it can take literal, real-life days before you plant a crop and have it grow within a reasonable amount of time. If the weather system were implemented by itself, it'd be an interesting feature, but having the weather system tie into the player-controlled resources creates a nightmare of scarce resources, and player nations trolling each other by destroying their resources. Again, the game tries to do something interesting, but kind of bumbles up the execution. As I mentioned in the next episode clue, and as you might have gathered a few times throughout this episode, the game goes for a thoroughly humorous tone, but pretty much everything is a joke. From the goofy quest titles to items with names like Goo Goo Power Ranger. When you notice one thing is a joke, you start to see it more and more, and realize that even the things you felt were being serious or were part of a long-standing lore will fall victim to this. You may look upon the name of the healing class Enaripsa's Hands and wonder what grand deity of light bestowed these thaumaturges with their healing gifts, and start to envision what Enaripsa would look like. You might see a Zelor's Sandglass and gain interest in what possible wonders the time god Zelor would command over this universe. They're aspirin and Rolex spelled backwards. This permeates all layers of the game pretty hard. Some things are more obvious. The oddly named Sedita's shoe class is Adidas reversed, and that's the joke. The name has nothing to do with a class. Iliotrope's portal contains the French word for portal in reverse. It's literally Portal's portal. 3 of the classes are named after snacks that the developers like to eat when they develop Dofus, and that's it. Some are more clever, like Ecaflip being read in reverse as Pillface, which invokes the French phrase pile ou face, or heads or tails. Unfortunately, be it the fault of translation, localization, or original intent, someone decided that jokey class names equate to jokey everything, and it gets grating when there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to the jokes. There's nothing clever about many of them, since they get shoehorned in constantly for literally no reason. There's an NPC named Egon Spengler. He doesn't hunt ghosts or collect ectoplasm, or even involve in any sort of scientific research. He's there because there was a Ghostbuster named Egon Spengler. End of reference. Thankfully, if you want some well-thought-out humor from this franchise, you can watch the anime. It's legitimately entertaining, with plenty of clever laugh-out-loud moments, but the English translation of this game seems to be sorely lacking that same writing talent. The community here is rather small, at least according to the server tracker and the low numbers of people we encountered. Now, that doesn't mean the game is dead by any means. We aren't talking LODs or black gold numbers here, and there is a dedicated player base that continues to play and enjoy the game for what it is. While we spent a lot of the gameplay section talking about the game's faults, we can see why people enjoy it and continue to play it. It's just that with such a small community and the silent majority ruling, you get, well, there isn't really a good way to put it, but the awfulness of the community is on display. You'll see some of the most terrible behavior running rampant. Open chat pleas for underage sex, people spamming emotes to slap female players on the ass and proclaiming how much they want to tap that. General insult fests and spam, both players and gold farm variety. Hell, there are even spam bots all throughout the starting zone, and we still haven't figured out how to report them. The real inevitable shame is the higher level players that decide to gank lower level players, taunting them and laughing like they know the lobies don't stand a chance. Likely due to the age-old shameful cycle of, I was picked on by higher-level players who can't fight their own level, so now I'll do the same, as if that makes it okay. With such a community on display, major issues, much like the ones we talked about in the Gathering system, are all too common. Since everything is player-run, and with all the players being able to freely travel to the various nations, you can be sure there's a lot of trolling and destruction of crops and trees to try to harass other factions. It's really up to your taste if you like this sort of gameplay, and while it does fit within a true sandbox, it can leave a rather sour taste in the mouth. More steps should have been taken to ensure entire groups of fauna couldn't be wiped out, bringing crafting to a standstill. There are interesting mechanics here, though. Besides the usual dungeons, you'll find that stores are actually player-run and set up whenever a player logs out of the game, assuming that you have the correct furniture piece within your haven bag. Players will also assist in digging the various mines scattered throughout the nations, bringing explosives to clear rocks, make tunnels, and expose precious ores, and lanterns will help light up the darkness. Honestly, it's an interesting take on the idea of a mine and allows each individual nation to come together to obtain further riches. It's a cool concept. The nations themselves, while always existing for canon reasons, can actually be run by the players, with one player amongst the nation's populace chosen as that leader. Naturally, like most MMOs out there, you can form your own guild at any time. Simply gather up 10,000 kama, the most easily achieved by using the ores to print your own, and locate a guildomatic within the guild bank. Originally, these were located in taverns around the land, but that changed somewhere along the lines. The wikis and forums for this game are horribly out of date. Once you pay a fee, you'll be asked to come up with a name for your guild. You can also create a crest for your guild using the heraldry system, which is a rather nice feature. After establishing your guild, you can invite other players using their character names and not their account names. I know this was a norm for guilds for a while, but with a new surge of guild system using account names so all alts are automatically added, we felt we should mention it here. From here you can perform guild quests and party up to earn guild points that are used to level your guild, either going up in true level or spending them on guild-wide buffs for members. There's also a guild haven that allows your guild to own land and build its own city and farmlands, and bring in money for the guild to use. Sadly, there is a very limited number of guild havens, totally 16 per nation, and they can only be acquired by winning an auction to take over that land. We never even saw an auction, let alone had the funds actually win one, so we can't comment how good the haven system is, but it does sound interesting on paper. You'll find the usual dungeons for your party adventures, and they're usually rather lame in the lower levels. We should clarify that we didn't get into many dungeons beyond level 30, but the dungeons that we did play were all very formulaic. The standard seems to be clear 2 group fights and then move on to the boss before exiting the dungeon, which, while ensuring doesn't outstay its welcome, does leave very little to be desired in complexity. Again, this may change later in the game and some mechanics of each dungeon will differ, but just be prepared for this early level dungeon grind, though it is broken up by the vast selection of those dungeons. Your fondness for this game will depend on many things, but I feel like having a solid group to play alongside you is probably your best bet for enjoyment. This is a game I would barely touch solo, but when we were all among friends, we had a blast playing it. So you might be better off bringing a few of your own friends, or just hope you get really lucky in finding a decent person to play this game with. The game's gotta make its money somehow, and this cash shop certainly isn't all that offensive. It's your standard run-of-the-mill item mall, providing all the services you've come to expect in other MMOs, with some odd placements and names. First, we should talk about the exchange rate, which comes across as rather odd. The currency is on the low side, but that isn't the issue. The oddity comes from when you look at the value of the dollar amount being asked for. $2.50 for 1,000 Ogrins, $6 for 3k, $10 for 5k, $28 for 13k, $40 for 23k, and $80 for 50k. We found it odd that you'd seemingly lose the exponential bonus when purchasing at the $28 level and receiving only 13k. You'd actually get far more if you bought 3 $10 packs than the $28 one, and those $2 don't make up the difference that's lost. It comes across like it was a typo, as if it would have made more sense to the pattern to have put it at 17 or 18k. Some of the items in the cash shop seem pretty expensive, while others seem really cheap, so it's a toss-up whether you feel the currency is overpriced or underpriced. So what sort of things can you find in the cash shop? There are standard boosters only available in VIP status, in increments of 3, 7, 30, and 90 days that offer you experience, drop rates, comma, and token increases, along with the ability to elect your nation's governor. The actual boosters can be found in consumables, along with bags for more inventory space and items used to transform runes. I guess that sort of makes sense, though it is a little odd. You'll find the standard assortment of costume items, emotes, titles within the cosmetic items section of the store. Sidekicks will offer you a secondary character to act as a party member, along with cosmetic items to customize their look. Mounts can be found in the oddly named Pets Mount tab, and normal pets can be found within the Pets tab. You can also purchase customizations for your Haven bag within the Housing tab, as well as a house to use in the previously mentioned Guild Haven should your guild have one. A subsection of the cash shop known as the Crow Shop is a place to purchase weapons and armor that aren't simply cosmetic pieces, and come with their own stats and empty rune slots. We can't say if this is pay to win, as the lowest item that we found within that shop was for level 50 characters, but it is worth keeping an eye on all the same. You can choose to respec your current class or change your national allegiance within the Restat tab. Lastly, you can purchase various services that allow you to change your class, assuming you pick the changer that's appropriate for your level, change your sex and style, or exchange the appearance of one item with the look of another. What you get out of Wakfu is entirely up to you, or your group. Make your own fun is apropos, even though there is some simple standalone fun to be had here. Some will be immediately drawn in by the tactical combat, while others might enjoy the open-world sandbox aspect, and there'll be those who won't like it for exactly the same reasons. At the very least, I'd suggest you try it out if anything in this video sounded appealing to you, and see if you're willing to let those experiences override any pass points. As for me and most of Grindstone, the combat is what sucked us in immediately, but the rest of the game didn't manage to keep our interest for too long. We might want to stop back occasionally, just for some dungeon runs, but I don't think too many of us are willing to put in the work and effort into the game that the game most definitely required. Here's my final rating. If you're invested in the world of 12 already, Ankama, Dofus, or the Wakfu anime, you're probably already playing this. Ankama's signature style is here and prevalent throughout the aesthetic, and the game simply doesn't look or play like many other games out there. It's a definite breath of fresh air. This especially holds true in the gameplay, as I can't name too many massively multiplayer online games that have a turn-based tactical combat system, or community-run resource mechanics. It's definitely something to check out for the uniqueness of it all. The mechanics might be right up the alley of someone who's really into the idea of complexity. The game itself has plenty of things to learn and discover, and even playing your class can reveal things you never thought you could do. Hop in if this concept excites you. Your best bet for getting the most out of this game is to go to the VIP subscription option. There's only one, possibly insignificant feeling thing that locked behind a paywall, but the overall booster should make the grind a little lighter. Prices on stuff vary greatly, and most items are considered cosmetic. It's a decent shop of items and most likely won't break your bank if you're looking to support the game. This is the most Korean grinder-like game that's not actually Korean, and most progression will be accomplished with repetitive tasks. There's no line of quest to lead you down a safe leveling path, just a massive open world with plenty of monsters and dungeons to encounter, and that's pretty much all you can do to progress. If you're not enamored with the combat in this game, the grind will feel torturous. Some people might be accustomed to the standard of MMO combat, what's known as stand and hack to many, but this game's turn and tactic-based take on the combat system is as polarizing as it is different. If you're the type that prefers to mindlessly wail on enemies until they fall over rather than try to think ahead with each step, or possibly wait up to 30 seconds for each player to do their own thing, this won't be the game for you. The community at large is so ingrained in this gameplay that if you get a bad apple or 12, they can bring down the entire flow of progress with relative ease. Be it the ever-present newbie ganks, the single-handed deforestation and trampling of your well-tended crops, or just general obnoxious behavior, it's pretty easy to be turned off of this game by the very players that you have to rely on. Your enjoyment of the game can easily boil down on how many other players in the servers are having a crappy day and looking for childish revenge in the world of 12. Of course, the community isn't the only thing that has a direct effect on the game. So does the weather, the nation you're standing in, the levels of Wakfu within that nation, the elemental properties of your class, and so much more complexity that some people might just choose to gloss over it all and give up in frustration. If you're noticing that complex mechanics is also included as a play point, then congrats on finally understanding how the play-pay-pass system works. Some might like it, others might hate it, and this complexity easily sits on both sides of that fence. Next time, we'll look at something completely different from the world of 12, by a publisher with a very specific niche. Thanks again for sticking around. If you want to check out some more videos, you can click on the left to see the previous episode on Alad's Online, or what's left of it. Digging through my archives in what was, God, a year ago? There's a show I almost never do called Browser Based, where I look at games playable through your browser. This one on a delightfully absurd gem called Dino Storm, an old West-style game where you ride and collect dinosaurs as a cowboy who wields laser guns. You know you want to check that shit out. Feel free to follow the show on Twitter at MMO_Grinder for updates on the new episode, or follow my personal Twitter at ChaosD1 for random insane babbling and constant retweets from Nihilist Arby's. Then of course there's the subscribe button if you haven't clicked it yet. I know you understand how this works. I believe in you. Doing that shout-out thing once again, only with one minor change this time. Slipstream is taking a break from gaming and streaming, since real jobs, unlike this phoned-in garbage thing I do, tend to get hectic. He's still working on his own game and getting feedback, and he's blogging all about it here at mindofthenewbiedev.tumblr.com. Michael Foy hasn't told me to stop plugging Ross Fairies in his website paradiseandfairies.com, so there's that address again. It's all a collection of review shows and articles about otakudom and geek culture, so check it out if you're still unreasonably pissed off at the way I pronounce anime. You'll probably find that site more to your liking.